Married into London's ultra-elite circle, Ethan Thompson and I had been together for 2 years. Beyond the 3 weekly sessions strictly at scheduled times, measured by that 30-centimeter thread drawn through the 47-kilogram needle, he remained always as cold as ice toward me. Then came the explosive headlines. Ethan Thompson wiping my sister's tears and chartering a private jet to chase after the woman in his heart. The news dominated every search engine overnight. As for me, seething in despair, pregnant, I fled as far away as possible, any distance from him, and London's financial aristocracy felt too short. 2 years later, Ethan and his bodyguards blockaded the entrance to my rented apartment. Before I could react, he spoke. Quick as lightning, I handed our daughter into his arms and said frostily, "Brother-in-law, you've arrived just in time. Look after her for me. My boyfriend's waiting to take me out." Ethan held Sophie in one arm and pressed me hard against the doorframe with the other. He let out a soft laugh. "Brother-in-law, having fun, are we?" Sophie's eyes widened in curiosity at the stranger holding her. I froze too. Ethan glanced at her, then leaned in close to me with a low voice. "Emily Carter, you do need to be taught a lesson." Sophie blinked and asked me, "Mummy, you said Daddy got bitten by a dog and went crazy. So who's this mystery uncle?" Just then, the teacher's office where I work erupted in chatter. One colleague was engaged, and her fiancé had gifted her an 8-carat diamond ring. The staff clustered around, whispering admiration. I politely offered congratulations and returned to my desk to continue preparing lesson plans. A colleague who'd long disliked me seized the moment. "Emily, your Cartier wedding band is quite stunning too," I smiled. "Thank you. It's a simpler style. No diamonds, but still a luxury brand. My husband's decent enough." That colleague snarked back. "We never see him anywhere. Been a while. Maybe he's shy?" Another piped up. "Yeah, Emily, why not show us for once?" I replied evenly. "He's busy with work. Doesn't like crowds." Her laughter turned hard. "Busy how? Busier than the mayor? No time even for a proper meal. It's obvious he doesn't value you." I shrugged helplessly. "He's incredibly busy. Sorry, everyone." Another whispered, "What a pity you can't show him off." She scoffed. "It's laughable. Does she think we all crave her ugly husband's attention?" I stood and looked at her calmly. "My husband's picking me up after work in a moment. Does anyone want to come see for themselves?" At that moment, a limited edition Bentley Continental GT Global exclusive version rolled to a stop at the school gates. The entire faculty froze. A sharply tailored senior executive suit was stepping out tall, handsome, and poised. The women remained silent. Squeezing my purse, I walked toward him, offering a smile. "Darling." Ethan appeared slightly surprised and gently lifted my handbag, effortlessly wrapping an arm around my waist. The headmistress and other administrators, having heard the news, hurried over to greet him with reverence. After all, a new office block and library on campus had been donated by the Thompson family. After a brief chat, Ethan escorted me to the car. Before we climbed in, I glanced back at that colleague. She bit her lip, paling, and the ring on her finger had somehow quietly come off. I gathered myself and gently took Ethan's hand. "Thank you for coming to pick me up today." He said nothing, only pulled me close and gently tweaked my ear. "So, tonight, you must impress me," he whispered. I realized then that tonight was our scheduled time. At 10, after finishing his work in his study, Ethan opened the bedroom door. I was seated at the dressing table, applying scented oil. The light cast a soft glow on his familiar but tired face from a long video conference. He removed his glasses, loosened his tie, and presented that calm and confident posture once again. I stood and moved toward him. "Let me help," I whispered, adjusting the collar of his shirt. Ethan quietly watched. I couldn't read his expression. I rose onto tiptoe and began to unbutton his shirt. Before I'd even finished the first few buttons, he lifted me effortlessly and placed me on the dressing table. The distance between us dissolved as his action was firm, yet not cold. I felt the warmth of his breath as he leaned close and murmured, "You smell so good." I smiled softly. "I just used that new scented skin oil." Ethan didn't reply. He tightened his grip on my waist gently. I breathed out, slightly startled. The mood between us wasn't tense. It was just the subdued emotion of two people who had grown used to distance. I leaned into his chest, feeling his heartbeat, wanting to hold that moment forever. I was about to ask about the new intern rumored to be pursuing him. Even my close friend had heard the gossip. But before I could speak, Ethan kissed my forehead tenderly. Not an answer, just a signal of care I rarely received. I didn't ask anything further. That night passed in our usual routine, but something felt different. Perhaps it was my newfound confidence, or perhaps he was no longer distant. Still, a vague sorrow lingered, as though I sensed I was clinging to the last fragments of affection. I didn't cry nor speak, just quietly lie beside the man I had once loved so blindly. The next morning, Ethan flew to Edinburgh on business as planned, but there was no message, no call for 3 days. I sat in the office sipping tea, editing my lesson plan. A colleague screeched in disbelief at her screen. I swear this is a news headline out of a novel, some billionaire chartering a jet to chase the woman in his heart. Before I could react, a phone was thrust into my hands. On the screen was the image of a man's hand wiping a woman's tears. On that ring finger was the exact Cartier wedding ring that I wore. I knew that hand, every ridge, every joint. I had gazed at it countless times while he slept, ran my fingers through it on many lonely nights. I said nothing. I simply drew my hand back, clenching my fist tightly. Then I cried tears of realization that the man I loved had never wiped away my tears. I had cried alone so many times in that cold mansion, and he'd never noticed. A call came in that afternoon. I was sitting alone in a cafe, dazed. His name flashed, Ethan Thompson. I hesitated before answering. His voice was steady, calm as ever. I'm headed back to London. Do you want anything? I bit my lip, heart tangled. I had never acted needy with him, but this time, inexplicably, I found myself wanting to. I quietly said, I'd like a custard tart from that old bakery in Edinburgh. Ethan paused a moment. Okay, anything else? I clutched the phone tightly, then, in a softer whisper, I want my husband to come home soon. There was a beat of silence. I thought I heard a gentle breath. All right, he said, voice a shade softer than usual. I'll be back tonight. After he hung up, he told his assistant to reroute the flight to fetch a custard tart from that famous artisanal bakery in Edinburgh. The assistant was startled. This wasn't in the plan, but he complied immediately. Ethan set down his phone, lit a cigarette, and stared out the aircraft window with unreadable eyes. A faint, rare smile brushed his lips, but in his eyes was a gentleness I almost didn't recognize. But as soon as I dared to be vulnerable to allow that longing, the universe intervened. A few days later, I left for the Lake District on a field trip the school had arranged. Then everything went silent. Torrential rains began. A landslide severed the village road where I taught. In hours, my world vanished as hope collapsed into darkness. Ethan, flying back from Edinburgh, learned the news. Terrified, he chartered his private jet to the Lake District. Rain lashed the hills, fog cloaked the peaks. Rescue teams set up camps but still had not found any sign of me. He landed, soaked through, face impassive, and walked straight to the rescue command center. I'm here to find my wife, Emily Carter, he said. Officials fell silent. The headmaster of the school, trembling, approached. Mr. Thompson. She volunteered for the trip. We didn't force her. Ethan's voice was flat. Where is she? The headmaster stammered. We haven't found her. She may still be buried. Silence thickened. Ethan slowly turned to look at the rain-slicked hills. No facade remained. Only a man frantic to find the woman he loved at any cost. I did not die. In that landslide, I was thrown off the road into a rocky edge and hit a large boulder, knocking myself unconscious. When I came to, I was lying in an old wooden house and had been rescued by locals. They were an elderly couple living far from the main village, who did not follow the news and did not recognize me. I did not tell them my real name. I said I was just a volunteer teacher with no family. As my strength gradually returned, I quietly left the Lake District by long-distance bus and traveled to a small town in southern England that I had heard my mother mention in bedtime stories when I was a child. I changed back to my mother's surname and cut off all contact completely. From that moment, Emily Carter, the wife of Ethan Thompson, no longer existed. I lived under the name Emma Langley, renting a small apartment in the suburbs, and kept myself hidden. My pregnancy passed in silence between fatigue and sleepless nights filled with nightmares. I did not go to a large hospital. I went to a small clinic, never giving a fixed address and always requesting confidentiality. I lived so discreetly that almost no one in the neighborhood knew I was expecting. I was afraid that one day Ethan or someone from the Carter family might find me. Afraid they would know the child in my womb was Ethan's and repeat the tragic ending from the story I remembered. But I could not abort. I did not have the courage. That child, though conceived in solitude, became the sole reason I continued to live. Whenever I felt like collapsing, I placed a hand on my belly and forced myself to rise again. Every day I whispered to my baby, "As long as you are safe, I can endure anything." I nicknamed her Sophie because, throughout pregnancy, I subsisted on raisin biscuits and sweet grapefruit juice. That tiny name held all my hope for peace. Sophie entered the world on an autumn morning at a modest local clinic. I was delivered by cesarean due to a mild complication, but luckily, everything went well. I held the doctor's hand tightly, and tears came when I heard her first cry, the most beautiful sound I had ever known. After discharge, I hired an elderly helper from nearby. She was kind and had lost her daughter, so she treated Sophie and me like family. She asked a few questions and silently cared for us. Every day I took Sophie for walks in the small park, read her stories, and sang lullabies my mother had sung to me as a child. Though the apartment was small, it brimmed with laughter as Sophie grew day by day. Time passed quietly in the southern town where Sophie and I lived under the new name Emma Langley. Our life was neither loud nor glamorous, but peaceful and full. I taught at a community education center, helping underprivileged children while Sophie grew up among kind neighbors who never questioned our past. On Sophie's first birthday, I baked a small cake flavored with sweet grapefruit, her favorite flavor since she was in my womb. The elderly caregiver sang happy birthday while seated beside her. The apartment was warm and filled with laughter. The next morning, I planned to go out to take care of some errands. After I changed clothes, Sophie suddenly came and clung to my legs, her big, innocent eyes filled with tears, as though she sensed something coming. I sat down and coaxed her gently. "Sophie, darling, Mummy will only be out for a moment." At that moment, the doorbell rang. Before I could move, the door was pushed open from the outside. A tall figure stood framed in the doorway. My heart froze. Ethan Thompson, the man I had once believed I would never meet again, was standing there. Behind him stood two bodyguards in black suits like silent sentinels. I stood frozen. Sophie stopped crying too, and her eyes shifted from me to the stranger. No one spoke for seconds that felt endless. I broke the silence first. Regaining composure, I immediately lifted Sophie in my arms and pushed her toward Ethan like throwing a hot ball. My voice was cold as though daring. "Brother-in-law, you arrived just in time. Please look after her for a moment. My boyfriend is waiting to take me out." Ethan instinctively took Sophie, saying nothing. His other hand pressed me hard against the door, his face so close, breath hot, yet no trace of the anger I once knew. "Brother-in-law seems to be enjoying this fun," he whispered, smiling but without a single playful glint in his eyes. Sophie blinked at him wide-eyed, then looked at me and innocently asked, "Mummy said Daddy is crazy because a dog bit his behind. So where did this uncle come from?" The question froze me. Ethan paused briefly, his eyes shifting from our daughter to me before swiftly regaining composure. He placed Sophie gently on the playmate in the living room and, in a gentle voice, said, "Sit quietly here." Something strange happened. Sophie usually clung to me, but she obeyed and sat quietly for the first time, her round eyes still fixed curiously on the stranger. Ethan turned toward me and stepped close. As though fearing Sophie might overhear, he leaned in to whisper, "Emily Carter, you truly need to be taught a lesson." Before I could respond, he unexpectedly hugged me hard. No longer cold, as in memory that embrace was heavy and trembling, his face buried in my shoulder, breath warm with tears. I could not believe the first feeling. Then a hot tear traced down my skin unmistakably. Real tears. My body stiffened. I tried to pull away, but his arms tightened, not letting me go. After a moment, he rasped softly, "Pack your things and come home with me." I looked at him, stunned. "Home to what?" Ethan stepped back half a step, his eyes glistening. "Emily, you took my daughter and ran away for all these years, thinking that was enough? I no longer have anything to do with Grace. A suitable kidney donor has been found. You have nothing to fear." I was speechless. His words struck like a wave, shattering the fortress of fate I had built. In the original story, I would have been forced to donate my kidney, forced to give up my child, and die on the operating table. But here, Ethan was living and present before me in pain, and he no longer mentioned grace. The narrative has changed, and I did not know whether it was good or bad. I took a step back, my back hitting the door behind me. Ethan kept watching me with steady eyes that showed no hesitation. I saw in them not only pain but something that resembled regret long held, something like a patient waiting. I bit my lip, voice trembling. "How did you find me?" Ethan did not immediately answer. He turned his gaze to Sophie, who sat silent, hugging her plush toy with wide, round eyes, watching us. His voice measured. "I searched everywhere. Every year I sponsored rescue efforts for missing persons. I never believed you were dead. Never believed even when faced with an empty memorial." He paused as though choked. I was stunned. I had never imagined he believed I was alive. I thought to Ethan I was just a closed chapter. But now he stood before me, each word tearing down the wall I had lived behind for 2 years. I lowered my head, hands clutching my coat. I cannot go back. I cannot return to a place where at any moment they could take away the most precious thing I have. Ethan furrowed his brows, took another step closer, voice low. "You mean the child?" I remained silent. He watched me for a long moment, then knelt on one knee before Sophie. His tone softened. "Sophie, would you like to live with Daddy?" Sophie tilted her head, looking to me as if waiting for permission, then gently nodded. "I want to live with Mummy, and he's okay too." Her answer made my heart tremble. I had not expected a 1-year-old to understand and feel so much. I blinked to clear my tears. Ethan stood up, moved closer, and gently whispered very low, "Emily, give me a chance. Not for me, but for our child. Sophie needs a family. A place where you do not have to run, do not have to sever every tie." I looked up at him, trying to find a crack in that gaze, some sign of deceit, but none there. Only sincerity and a pain suppressed too long. I nodded slightly. Ethan exhaled softly, as though someone just won the longest war of his life. He stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder, not as pressure, but as a touch just enough to let me know this time he wanted not to control but to hold. I sat down beside Sophie, holding my child as Ethan took a seat opposite our daughter. His gaze softened. In that moment, I knew the scars from the past would remain, but the future could begin to heal. We spoke no more that evening. Ethan stayed, sitting in the living room with Sophie late into the night. He didn't force me to pack up or return that night. He understood I needed time, and perhaps he too needed time to make amends. I prepared a simple dinner: vegetable soup, plain rice, and rolled eggs, Sophie's favorite meal. For the first time, Ethan sat at the small round table in the apartment where I had lived for over a year. He ate slowly, without complaint. He even served extra vegetables for Sophie, coaxing her to eat each small bite. Watching him, my heart stilled. All resentment faded, leaving only emptiness and a surprising sense of warmth. After Sophie finished eating, she grew sleepy. I carried her into the bedroom and laid her on the small bed beside the window. She turned once or twice and fell asleep quickly. I stood in the dim softness of the room, watching her steady breathing, then closed the door and returned to the living room. Ethan was still there. When I emerged, he looked at me not with urgency anymore, but with calm now that tension had been released. "You want me to stay tonight?" he asked in a whisper. I hesitated, then quietly nodded. We did not share a bed. Ethan spread a thin blanket and lay on the sofa. Before he fell asleep, he said only one thing: "You don't have to forgive me yet, but I will be here, every day." I turned my back, saying nothing, but inside, something softened piece by piece. The next morning, I woke early as always and prepared tea and breakfast. When I stepped into the living room, Ethan was already seated in a shirt, hair still damp from his shower. Sophie sat in her father's arms, eating porridge spooned by her father. That ordinary scene stopped me for a moment. He looked at me and smiled gently. "Miss Carter, your cooking has gotten a lot better these days." I glared at him. "Quiet. Just eat." He laughed. Once that laugh scared me, but now hearing it felt oddly comforting. That day, Ethan didn't press me to talk about returning to the mansion or my identity. He simply asked about Sophie's routine, my health, and offered to take us for a full checkup at a private clinic nearby. I agreed not because I fully trusted him, but because, for the first time, I didn't feel cornered. He was right. I needed to think of Sophie. And if he truly had changed, truly wanted to enter our lives as a father and protector, perhaps this time I could move forward without looking back. The soft golden lamplight filled the living room, silence broken only by the ticking clock. I sat beside Ethan on the small sofa, an untouched cup of tea beside me. The quiet now felt suffocatingly heavy. Finally, he spoke slowly. "Emily, what was it like when you gave birth to Sophie?" His voice had dropped low, anxious as though he feared this moment slipping away. I breathed deeply, then nodded, my gaze fixed on the cold cup of tea beside me. "Do you want me to tell you?" I inhaled deeply. I set the cup down, listening to its soft sound on the tabletop. My eyes began to fill with tears. Yes, it hurt so much. I recalled that day in vivid detail. I had woken early. The pain started around 3 in the morning, each contraction like a knife. The taxi slid along wet roads as I lay still, cold spreading through my body. At the hospital, they looked at my file, no husband, no address, and handed me an exemption form as if childbirth were an imposition. The doctor said they would administer spinal anesthesia, but as the scalpel cut the first layer of my abdomen, I still felt the raw burn, the sting of blood, my heart pounding. The anesthesia helped, but it wasn't enough to block the pain. I whimpered to the doctor, "Please give me a stronger dose," but no one could. They just shook their heads. "Don't be weak, for your child." Blood flushed my face. The pain stretched on like crossing an ocean. With each beat of my heart, I fought to stay conscious. I must stay alive. My daughter needs me. Through that agony, I didn't cry out. I didn't scream. I begged for more pain relief, but the doctors only shook their heads. "Don't show weakness, because of the baby." When Sophie's first cry filled the room, I woke. My body was cold as ice. Sweat dried to dust. I lay there trembling, the world blurred. No applause, no encouragement, no flowers, no one to pull up a blanket, only emptiness, like being erased from existence. I forced myself up and walked to a mirror in the hospital corridor. My hair was disheveled, my eyes bruised, but I forced a smile just to prove I was still alive. I shook off those painful memories. Ethan's face blurred as tears streamed down my cheeks, tears I didn't notice falling. Ethan's hand trembled as he wiped them away, but wiping wouldn't finish. At last he spoke softly. "At that time, Grace was having her kidney transplant surgery. You were alone in a foreign place with no one familiar nearby. Ethan, if you married me because you love me, why were you willing to go chase after my half-sister on a jet? Do you know how I felt seeing you wiping Grace's tears, seeing you in the headlines?" I cried aloud, all the anguish and sorrow unleashed at once. He exhaled quietly. "It started when Grace saved my life from that cave collapse." His voice cracked with wounds in every word. "I only wanted to repay that debt of gratitude, but it's all done now. I will be forever with you. I will love you and protect you." I stood. My legs trembled as though trying to run from a storm raging in my chest. My hand gripped the empty teacup, palm cold as ice, yet my wrist felt like it was on fire. I stepped closer to Ethan, a single stride between us, yet miles of broken memories. The overhead lamp cast yellow light, and shadows stretched long and distorted like my life. I gazed deep into his eyes. Was that cave collapse 10 years ago due to a dam? Failure? You were the boy in the Superman shirt, right? Ethan froze. I gripped the cup with white knuckles. "I was the child who kept you conscious in that cave. I was the one who ran to the emergency phone on the dirt road to call for rescue. My arm was injured, but I ran in the rain back and waited. When the rescue team arrived, Grace was standing there first. She wore that red shirt she'd snatched from me." My throat tightened. She looked at me and said, "If I speak out, they will come for you. Your parents will be gone." I was 7 years old, Ethan. I believed her. So I stayed silent. I turned slightly, voice dropping as if speaking to myself. I never imagined she would do that to me. When I thought she was my sister, I couldn't hold it anymore. Cracks in my soul burst open. I sat down heavily, head falling onto his shoulder, onto the man I once loved, despised, and ultimately abandoned. Tears poured uncontrollably, soaking the cotton of his shirt beneath my cheek. I sobbed in short, sharp breaths, like knives carving through the air. I gave birth to Sophie alone. It hurt so much I didn't think I would survive. Then I opened my eyes to no one beside me. No congratulations, no family, no hand to hold mine. Ethan said nothing. He simply held me, arms strong but trembling, as though he too wrestled with newfound pain. His chin rested gently on top of my hair. One arm cradled me, the other moved to stroke my back softly to soothe a child. His breath caught, slow and unsteady. "I'm sorry," he whispered, barely audible, but I heard him, and I felt something else unspoken, but clear in my heart. "We only need one, Sophie. I won't have any more children." For the first time in years, I could cry without fear of judgment. I was being held by someone who didn't see me as weak. For the first time, I felt I deserved to belong as a real woman, not a secondary character in someone else's story. After all those words and tears were spent, Ethan said nothing else. He remained still, arms around me, until I could feel our breaths pulse in harmony. I rested my head against his shoulder with closed eyes. My heart no longer raced with anger or braced itself for defense. Only peace remained, something I had forgotten existed. Ethan lifted me gently and carried me to bed like a cherished keepsake. He placed me down without a word. He lay beside me, pulling me into his chest. In his arms, I finally slept through the night deeply after so many years. The next morning, the phone rang shortly after 7. Sunlight poured through the curtains into the room, scented faintly with jasmine tea. I drifted awake and reached for the phone on the bedside table. The screen showed a name I never thought I would see again: Grace Carter. My heart skipped a beat. Ethan was still sleeping behind me, breathing steadily. I watched him for a moment, then quietly stood up and walked onto the balcony, phone still in hand. I answered Grace's call. Her voice sounded weak, not strong anymore, hoarse and faltering. "Emily, I want to see you one last time." I gripped the phone without asking why and simply replied, "Okay, I will come." I hung up and stood there a few minutes watching sunlight bounce off the street below. My chest felt oddly light, not because the pain was gone, but because I knew. It was time to close this chapter. I returned to the bedroom and looked at Ethan still sleeping. My heart softened. Even though today I would face the woman who once took everything from me, I was not the old Emily any longer, no longer a shadow, no longer the little girl made to stay silent. I stood in the cold, white corridor of the hospital, lights cast down silently like a final farewell. After everything, it had come to this. Grace lay there under dim bulbs, gaunt yet still retaining her proud grace. When our eyes met, neither of us spoke for a long moment. Then weakly she whispered, "Emily, I'm sorry for everything." I said nothing. I quietly sat beside her bed. Without a word, I reached out and held Grace's frail hand. We both felt the shift behind those barren eyes. She continued, "I lived in his debt, basking in the glow that came from being Grace in his heart. But in the end, the one who suffered most was you." She paused, then sighed heavily. "I'm sorry I forced you to stay silent for 20 years. I thought I would be respected by you, but instead I became someone you hated. But today I finally understand that no matter how much effort I made, I could never hold what was never mine." Her voice grew weaker. I looked at Grace with only compassion, no blame. It was time to end this. Moments later, she closed her eyes. Her final breath left her like a silent wave sinking into the sea. At the end, she smiled one last time, soft like autumn, faint as a snuffed candle, without pain or bitterness. When I returned home, Ethan and Sophie were waiting. Ethan did not ask anything. He knelt and gathered me into his arms, soft as a leaf lifted after a storm. Sophie whispered, "Mummy." We drove to our small new home by the river. The old mansion no longer suited us. We needed peace, simplicity, earth, water. Every afternoon, Ethan took Sophie and me for walks along the riverside. On Sophie's first bike ride, he and I shared a tiny custard tart. We did not need a lavish wedding or a grand estate. We lived simply sunshine in the morning breeze on the balcony by day, warmth of lamplight at night. Ethan learned to love Sophie each night in bedtime stories. Sophie grew up to songs whispered by me when she was still in my womb, and I discovered how to reclaim peace after 20 years of a heart weighed down like stone dust, now lifted by gentle breaths.